Hey there, this is Mr. Icarus, and welcome to yet another edition of Doom Mod Madness. This time round, we are checking out MetaDoom. What exactly is MetaDoom? Well, it's kind of tricky to describe. It's a mod that smushes together elements from all across the Doom franchise. It's the reason why the shotgun here also has a grenade launcher attached to it. It's the reason why the rocket launcher here looks a little different from the usual, and it's also the reason why there's a score tracker embedded in the HUD at the bottom there. So how exactly does this all work? With all of these clashing elements, you'd imagine that a mod like MetaDoom would just descend into utter incomprehensible chaos after a short while, but that's where MetaDoom had something fairly intelligent up its sleeve. Rather than randomizing its weapon drops, MetaDoom seeks to make them a little bit more structured instead. It's the reason why you won't see me picking up insanely powerful weaponry right off the bat. Instead, you're going to have to pick up the first weapon in the tier before subsequent weapons start to drop. This weapon right here, for example, which is a mashup between Doom 3's machine gun and the micro-missile mod from New Doom, is the first in its particular weapon slot. Now that I have that in my armory, I run a much higher chance of coming across subsequent weapons in that slot during my travels. In this case, it would be the chain gun. However, the chances of me running into that weapon during this particular level, I feel are relatively slim. In my experience, MetaDoom is the kind of mod that wants you to play across multiple levels in order to experience much of what it has to offer. There's a relatively small chance of you being able to do that through the course of just one map. Thankfully, MetaDoom isn't just solely concerned with weaponry here, it's also concerned with bringing monsters from across the Doom franchise into the same chaotic mixing bowl. As you may have noticed there, that was a Hell Knight from Doom 3. You may have also noticed that it had a few moves borrowed from its brethren in New Doom as well. Interestingly enough, the way MetaDoom handles its monster spawns here is in a very similar fashion to the way it handles its weaponry. Rather than giving you absolutely everything straight off the bat, it instead decides to hold it back a little, instead introducing you to more vanilla variety enemies at first, before introducing more exotic versions later on down the line in subsequent levels, meaning you don't get a bit of an unfair difficulty spike early on. So, with the technicalities out of the way, let's talk about how it actually feels to play. It's pretty damn fun once it gets going, and the only trouble I really see with MetaDoom is it does take a little while actually gearing itself up. The effect of that very deliberate pacing with the weapon spawns and the monster spawns means that you may potentially have to play through a fair few levels until you actually get to the stuff you really want to get to grips with. The chain gun cannon here, for example, didn't spawn for a good long while in my particular playthrough, which, let's face it, can get a little frustrating, especially if you know you've fulfilled the conditions that mean the game should ideally be dropping that spawn sooner rather than later. In fact, I'd say this is a persistent problem across most of the higher tier weapon spawns here in MetaDoom. They just feel like they take too long to drop, to such an extent that I feel lucky if I see certain weapons appear during the course of an extended period of play. That said, this is still a mod that's being actively worked on. More weapons are planned for future iterations of this mod, so who knows, there may be additional weapons to fill the gaps between those drops that feel so long at this particular point. Speaking of weapons that are tough to get a hold of, let's talk about a few of them. This right here is the Holy Water Pistol. You heard me. It's a water pistol that shoots holy water, and when you shoot demons with it, they run away crying, which is just a downright wonderful touch. And yes, if you shoot them enough with it, they do in fact fall over dead, which has to be an embarrassing way for any demon to go. You can also top up your health with it by drinking from it, which I completely misinterpreted the first time round. I think my brain was having an off day, and I took that animation to mean that Doom Guy was peeing into the Holy Water Pistol and filling it back up. I don't know, it seemed like a good idea for the weapon at the time, okay? What does in fact fill it up, however, is standing in water, which is a pretty neat touch. Next on the list is the Grenade Launcher, which I believe is from one of the multiplayer DLCs for Doom 2016. This comes with two firing functions. Its primary is an explosive grenade that detonates on impact with an enemy. If it misses, it'll just bounce around a bit before exploding all on its own. Its secondary fire, however, is a gas grenade, which, as you can imagine, spreads poison gas on impact, and anything unfortunate enough to be caught within its radius will be dealt continuous damage. Also, handy side effect, any enemies caught within that radius will continuously flinch as well, meaning that they won't be able to fire back or really do anything while they're stuck within the poison cloud. So quite good for crowd control, quite good for thinning out the herd if you're having a troublesome time. Now, I'm sure you've already seen what the plasma gun here does, but the secondary fire is something that I'm not sure you're aware of. Basically, much like Doom 2016, you can charge up a radial explosion of plasma from the plasma gun here, but it takes a little time to charge up. You can see a little meter on the front of my gun there that'll look kind of like a Wi-Fi bar, but when it reaches full, it doesn't mean you're going to get great download and good signal. It means that anything near enough to you is pretty much going to die. Well, I say that. It's not especially powerful. It could probably do with a buff, but either case, neat feature. Something you may not be aware of. Let's try it again, just to be sure. Nope, that didn't work. Next up, we of course have the Gauss Cannon. How can you not love the Gauss Cannon? Just turning things to mush from a great distance with its alt-fire scope. Unfortunately, it doesn't come equipped with siege mode here, which was a feature of the Gauss Cannon in Doom 2016, but hey, you can't always have everything. Still a rather fun weapon. Let's shoot someone else, just for good measure. There we go, lovely. Really enjoying the chunky gore of this particular mod, gotta say. Anyway, after that, we've got the lightning gun. Its alt-fire stuns enemies, but I'm not sure if it actually damages them, even though there's blood spraying onto the walls there. Now, to actually damage them, you gotta use the primary fire, which is actually quite short in terms of range. You've got to be reasonably close to your enemies here to actually inflict some damage, and when it comes to the tougher enemies, you probably want to keep them at more than arm's length, so not really a suitable weapon for all occasions. But guess what is? That's right, the BFG Goddamn 9000. This one taking very heavy cues from the Doom 2016 model. Not quite sure how I feel about that secondary fire though. I imagine it's a mode geared more towards mobs of lower health enemies, but that primary fire is on point, inflicting grazing damage as it passes by enemies before exploding and ultimately killing everything within eyeshot. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. But wait, there's more. There's also the Unmaker from Doom 64, a weapon that I've never quite fully understood, if I'm going to be honest. In this form, it feels very much like a pew-pew laser gun. I imagine much like Doom 64, there'll be a way to power it up in future, but let's leave that to then. Because this is now, and we have a Soul Cube. And a Soul Cube pretty much murders anything it hits, provided you have enough souls to power it up. If I'm not mistaken, I think it only takes 5 souls from downed enemies to actually fully charge. So let's 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 5 souls. There we go. Scientifically accurate here on Doom Mod Madness. And as you can see, it causes any enemies hit by it to just explode into treats for every possible thing you could ever hope for, be it ammunition, health, armor. It's all scattered on the floor. Now the axe. The axe is interesting. Hit an enemy that's flimsy enough with it, they generally explode into lovely, gory bits and pieces. It also has the beneficial side effect of causing enemies to hemorrhage health pickups, which is good if you're in a little bit of a pinch, but I'd refrain from using this against more robust enemies. They tend to take more chunks out of your health than you can conceivably recoup with this thing. Also, yes, you can in fact use a flamethrower against certain enemies in MetaDoom. It's pretty damn fun. Just watching Lost Souls just kind of freeze in midair with that dumb expression on their faces is well worth the faff of getting into the right kind of situation to actually use it. Unfortunately, the range is pretty short. They've got to be reasonably close to you for it to be effective, but when it does happen, it's pretty damn great. This can also be used against imp fireballs, it can be used against mancubus projectiles, and I'm tempted to say it may also be effective against archvile flame pillars, but unfortunately not had the chance to test it against those just yet. If I had to pick my favorite thing in MetaDoom though, it would have to be this. You can actually use an item here to pick up some of the zombie dogs and actually use them as a melee weapon. And it's just a wonderful stroke of madness. I don't know if this was actually possible in one of the Doom franchise games, maybe in the Doom RPG. Let's face it, the Doom RPG had the holy water pistol and the fire extinguisher. Why not this? Anything is possible. Also, no, you weren't seeing things earlier. You can, in fact, throw this at your enemies. It does, in fact, explode, and yes, everything about this is absolutely fantastic. Speaking of usable items here in MetaDoom, the rest of the roster here seems comprised of stuff you may recognize from Doom 2016. This right here is a Siphon Grenade, a tremendously useful item. Chuck it at an enemy, hoovers up their health, and transfers it back to you. Very, very handy if you're stuck in a bit of a pickle. In terms of other stuff, you've got the hologram, which can distract enemies, force them to attack it while you hang back and think about what you want to do next. For example, switching to another item, such as this, which we're going to use again because why the hell not, honestly. And then there's the tassel grenade. This is a hovering grenade that runs in a straight line and inflicts damage on anything it passes close by. Pretty fun to use. Pretty interesting, something I didn't really get a lot of use out of myself during the course of Doom, mainly because this is more of a multiplayer weapon item than anything else. And then there's the grenades. Grenades are pretty fun, reasonably straightforward. I typically hammer the item use key when there's something vaguely intimidating in my path, and the subsequent hail of grenades is usually enough to just take care of business. After that, we've got the shield wall, which I appear to have none of, which is a little unfortunate. Don't mind me, I'm just going to hide around here and type in IDKFA while no one's looking. And there we go, we can deploy a few of these. Now these block enemy gunfire and enemy projectiles, but they're a little flawed. As you can see, the Hellraiser gets through it and, yeah, not entirely effective. Hopefully that will be rectified at some point in the future. So, when it comes down to it, what do I ultimately think of MetaDoom? Well, firstly, it's a minor miracle that this mod even makes any kind of sense whatsoever. I mean, you're mashing up elements of Doom 1, 2, 3, Doom 4, and even Doom RPG. You've got all of these clashing elements smushed together, and somehow, against all odds, it isn't a complete and utter clusterfuck. In fact, it's quite the opposite. There's a tremendous sense of structure here in MetaDoom, something that sets it well and truly apart from your average randomized gameplay weapon mod. You feel like you're making some genuine progression as you move from level to level and do eventually come across those weapon upgrades and those incremental variations in monsters that you'll have to fight. But as I've already mentioned, I still feel like this mod could do with a little bit of a kick up the arse with regards to pacing. Otherwise, you're just going to have a fair amount of patience, especially if you want to legitimately get your hands on the vast majority of the arsenal here in MetaDoom. But in either case, if you feel like checking this out for yourself, the link is as usual in the description below. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments below, and feel free to suggest any mods you'd like to see me cover in future episodes of Doom Mod Madness. This has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.